Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into something pretty significant, a policy shift that's kind of slipped under the radar in Washington.
That's right.
We're talking about in-school deferment for federal student loans specifically, how it's set to disappear for new borrowers starting in the 2026-27 academic year.
Yeah, and our source material today really highlights the shock and anger around this, how something so consequential was, almost hidden.
Exactly. So the big question we're tackling is, why? Why dismantle one of the last real safety nets for student borrowers? Why do it now? And maybe most importantly, why so quietly?
Well, our deep dive today, based on our source, suggests this isn't just some minor tweak or a bureaucratic oversight.
Okay.
The author argues it's actually part of a much bigger, quite deliberate reshaping of public life here in the U.S.
Deliberate reshaping.
Yeah. Our goal is to explore what the source calls the deeper architecture behind this move, to try and understand the argument that this isn't a system failing, but perhaps a system being carefully redesigned.
And we're drawing on a really insightful article for this, right? One that blends personal experience with policy analysis.
That's the one. It gives us a few different angles to look at this whole situation.
All right, so let's start with the change itself, the nuts and bolts. If you, or maybe someone you know, takes out new federal student loans after July 1st, 2026, well, that in-school deferment, it's gone.
Just gone. No pause on payments while you're studying, no shielded time.
And it gets worse, right? Even the subsidized loans.
Yes, even those. The ones specifically designed so interest wouldn't build up while you were in school. Now, interest starts piling on from day one, the day the money goes out.
Wow. That's a fundamental shift for anyone planning their finances for college.
It really is. And to get why it's such a big deal, you have to look back a bit. The source points out that in-school deferment wasn't just some perk.
Right.
It was kind of a structural promise, a necessary buffer, really, in a system where higher education wasn't free anymore.
Okay, so connect the dots for us.
The author traces this back to the Nixon and Reagan eras. That's when we saw the start of dismantling tuition-free public college systems.
Which was partly framed as a way to deal with campus protests back then.
Exactly. A kind of disciplinary move, the source suggests, turning university from a public good into a private cost you had to bear yourself.
And deferment was like a small concession within that new reality.
Kind of. It gave students, especially working-class students, just a little breathing room after graduation before the loan payments kicked in, a chance to find their feet.
And that window, that buffer, it's now closing for future borrowers.
That's the argument. That critical window is being shut.
And what makes our source material really hit home here is that the author isn't just an observer.
No, not at all.
They're living this. As a parent with kids nearing college age, as a student themselves going back to community college, as a borrower, and as a public educator.
Yeah, they use this phrase like they're standing in it, ankle deep in the mud of it.
Which really grounds the analysis. So thinking about you listening, what does all this actually mean if you're planning for college or maybe helping someone else plan?
Well, to help us think bigger picture, the source uses this really striking metaphor.
Okay, what is it?
They say public education is being cleared like land for development.
Cleared like land. Huh. Explain that a bit.
The author draws a parallel to what they term settler colonial projects, outlining this sort of step-by-step process.
Okay.
First, you undermine it. You call it broken, failing, maybe even dangerous. Discredit the land, so to speak.
Create a narrative of failure.
Then you pull the resources, defund it, withdraw care. Just let it visibly decay.
Which makes the next step easier.
Exactly. The clearing becomes easier to justify because it looks like it's already falling apart. And then in its place, you build something new.
A new order.
Yeah, one the source describes as more profitable, more controllable, and more aligned ideologically with those already holding power. It's a powerful comparison to frame this not as accidental decline, but intentional replacement.
And the source gives examples of what's replacing it, this new order.
Oh, yeah. It's described as a patchwork of private control. Think banks getting more involved, religious charter school networks expanding.
Those gig credentialing startups we hear about?
And lots of tech platforms promising personalized learning, but the author argues they're also capturing and sorting kids' data for profit.
The source calls it enclosure, like fencing off common land, repurposing it.
Precisely. Repurposing. And the key takeaway from the source here is, this is design, not failure. Don't look at each cut or change in isolation, the author warns. See the pattern.
See the pattern. Okay, let's talk about the money then. The source uses the phrase brutal math.
Yeah, the numbers they run are sobering.
Give us an example.
Okay, so they calculate that a student borrowing the federal maximum, which is around $200,000 for some graduate programs, could, with these new terms, end up repaying almost $800,000.
Wait, $800,000 on a $200,000 loan?
Over the lifetime of the loan, yes. That's what the calculation suggests. The source calls it a threefold return for lenders and compares it to, like, predatory mortgage terms.
Wow. Okay, what about a more typical undergraduate loan?
They look at the average around $35,000. At the projected new interest rate, maybe 13% paid back over 10 years. You're looking at over $63,000 total paid,
So almost double.
with nearly $28,000 just in interest. And the source puts it very bluntly, that's not education, that's rent on a diploma.
Rent on a diploma, that's a heavy line.
It connects to another really critical point the source makes. This shift from seeing debt as maybe an opportunity
Right, like an investment in your future.
to seeing what they call debt as governance.
Debt as governance, what does that mean?
Well, the old idea, maybe linked to Keynesian economics, was that debt could be a bridge. You borrow, get educated, or buy a house, get stable, pay it back. The government helps smooth things out.
Okay, I follow.
But the source argues that whole framework is basically gone. Now, student debt, along with medical and housing debt,
Yeah.
it functions more like behavioral control.
How so?
It dictates where you can afford to live, the kinds of jobs you have to take, maybe keeps you from speaking out or challenging things because you're just trying to stay afloat. It's described almost as a lifetime subscription model you can't cancel.
And under this model, the student isn't seen as a future contributor anymore.
According to the source, no, not a future doctor or a teacher. You're redefined. You become a client, a risk profile, basically a revenue stream with a yield.
Just a number on a spreadsheet.
That's the implication.
Now, the counter argument you always hear is, well, the government has to balance its books. This is just budgetary necessity.
Right, but the source pushes back hard on that.
They don't buy it.
No. The author claims the numbers don't actually force this change. And interestingly, they say even the banks weren't directly asking for this specific elimination of deferment.
So if it's not budget numbers and not the banks demanding it, what is it then?
The source calls it an ideological move, pure and simple, a signal that the federal government is stepping back from guaranteeing educational opportunity.
And instead,
Instead, the author argues, it's becoming a system of wealth extraction disguised as reform, where effectively the debt burden on working people helps finance, other priorities like tax cuts or allows wealth to pool at the top.
okay, so if this is a deliberate clearing, as the source puts it, who benefits? Who's doing the clearing?
This is where the source introduces a really fascinating, maybe provocative idea, the Dominionist Oligarch Alliance.
Dominionist oligarch. Those sound like two very different groups, Christian dominionists and tech libertarians.
Seemingly, yeah. But the source argues they're working in uncanny synchrony.
How? What's the connection?
The shared goal, according to the author, boils down to control.
Control.
Dominionists, the source suggests, want obedience to a specific moral or religious code. Tech oligarchs want predictability, populations that can be managed efficiently, like systems.
And both see public education
There's
as...
a problem, an obstacle,
Yeah.
not a fundamental right, something that needs to be solved or dismantled rather than supported. The alliance, the source argues, is about taking apart the public commons to consolidate their own forms of power.
And they go about it differently.
Yeah, the source describes distinct tactics. The Dominionist wing focuses on what they call culture war stuff, banning books, rewriting history curricula, getting ideologically aligned people into teaching roles.
While the tech side,
Pushes privatization, ed tech platforms that monitor students, classroom surveillance tools, AI tutors replacing human interaction, market-based solutions.
so working in parallel, the source claims they're essentially hollowing out the space where collective thought once lived, ready to rebuild it their way.
That's the argument, leading to an outcome the source describes grimly as education without resistance, development without democracy.
A system where the main lessons are obedience and debt.
That's the stark picture painted. It's not just clearing physical schools, but clearing, the space for critical thinking, for imagining different futures.
Let's dig a bit deeper into that idea of education as ideological terrain.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes this. It's not just about teaching skills, right? It's a place where meaning is made, where societies decide whose stories get told, whose history counts.
A battleground, essentially.
Definitely. It's where, as the source says, memory can be passed down, where solidarity can be built, where critique can take root. And because it has that potential,
It needs to be controlled or cleared.
if you want to maintain a certain kind of order, yes, that's the argument.
And the source points to concrete examples of this clearing happening now.
Absolutely. Things like the book bans we see, the fights over history curriculums, the increasing use of surveillance tech in classrooms, monitoring both kids and teachers for ideological impurity, as the source puts it.
They mention Oklahoma specifically.
Yes, highlighting the state contracting with PragerU, which the author describes as a far-right propaganda outfit to help create an ideological screening tool for teachers coming from out of state.
Wow. So screaming teachers before they even get in the door based on ideology.
It's about controlling the narrative at the source, ensuring teachers reproduce the state's preferred viewpoint. That's the source's interpretation.
And the source connects this to historical patterns, saying this isn't entirely new.
Right. They draw a really poignant parallel to Black WWII veterans after the war.
With the GI Bill.
Exactly. They had the promise of the GI Bill benefits, but in practice were often systematically denied access to the universities, the housing loans, the business accreditations that white veterans received.
A promise without land, as the source calls it.
A perfect phrase. A trap perfected on those pushed to the margins. And the argument is that same basic structure, promise opportunity, but deny real access, offer eligibility without true inclusion, is now being scaled up.
So the trap built for the margins is becoming the model for the mainstream.
That's the chilling suggestion. Scaled and streamlined for a much broader population.
And it's clear who gets hurt most by these kinds of shifts, isn't it?
Absolutely. The source is very clear. This disproportionately harms working-class students, first-generation college-goers, Black and brown students, students with disabilities, neurodivergent students.
Basically, everyone for whom college was held up as the ladder out, the escape route from inherited precarity.
Precisely. And the numbers, the source notes, back this up. Over 92% of student debt is federal debt. That's $1.75 trillion.
And tuition costs.
Through the roof. Public college tuition more than doubled since the early 90s. Private tuition, astronomical. These are the students graduating already deep in the red.
So for them, deferment wasn't just nice to have, it was essential.
Often a condition of survival, the source argues. And now it's being taken away.
Which brings us to how this happened so quietly. The source calls it silence as strategy.
Yeah, this is incredible. We're talking about over 43 million people in the U.S. with federal student loans. That's almost 1 in 5 adults.
Huge number.
And yet, this major policy change, gutting a key protection, essentially slipped through with, according to the author, almost zero public discussion. No big hearings, no town halls.
No headlines, no viral videos explaining it.
Nope. Just a clause, the author says, buried hundreds of pages deep in some massive bill.
And the source argues that silence wasn't an accident, it was the point.
Exactly. Strategic. Because imagine the backlash if those 43 million borrowers, many still dealing with past loan issues, were told directly, hey, future students, they lose that breathing room.
There would have been outrage, protests.
Probably. So the source argues they just weren't told. Silence becomes the tool. Silence is the new infrastructure, as the author puts it, to keep people quiet, maybe feeling isolated and powerless.
And the result of all this, the rising costs, the disappearing protections.
One devastating consequence the source points to, some young people are just opting out of college altogether.
They're doing the math.
They're clocking the maths. They see tuition climbing, protections vanishing, and decades of debt looming even for modest borrowing. And they're saying, no thanks.
Which sounds rational, but the source sees a danger there.
A huge danger. By opting out, the source warns, they risk becoming part of what's termed a permanent reserve army of labor. A surplus workforce kept insecure, kept pliable by fear, by debt for those who did borrow, and by this sense of manufactured scarcity, quietly taken off the board.
It's a chilling thought, and it makes you wonder, if something this big can happen so quietly to so many people, what else is being planned in the quiet?
Which, the source suggests, is why we need critical tools to understand what's happening. This is where they bring in frameworks like aspects of the Marxist tradition.
Okay, how does that help here?
Not as dogma, the source clarifies, but as a compass. Marx provides the language to analyze, the material stuff, how the wealth is made, who benefits, who doesn't, concepts like surplus value, alienation from your work.
And enclosure, that idea of privatizing common resources.
Exactly. It gives historical context. Then, thinkers like Lenin, the source suggests, help understand how the state itself can act in the interests of certain groups, not neutrally.
And Mao.
Mao's experience, particularly with revolutionary education in China, shows what can happen when education is used as a mass tool for liberation, for social change, not for locking people into debt. These are analytical tools, the source argues, for grasping the stakes and potentially resisting.
So wrapping this up, the core message from our source is stark. What looks like a broken system might actually be a deliberately constructed one.
Yeah, built, the author claims, to extract value from the majority and consolidate power for a few. The source even calls it the architecture of a new feudalism.
But the author also insists education isn't just a commodity.
Absolutely not. It's not just a revenue stream or a place to conquer. It's framed as a right, a tool, and potentially a weapon, especially when people use it collectively.
So what can people listening actually do? What's the advice from the source?
Okay, first, the really practical, urgent thing. If you or your kids or anyone you know is planning on federal student loans, the source says do everything possible to borrow before July 1st, 2026.
Get the loans dispersed before that date.
Yes, because loans taken out before then still fall under the old rules.
Yeah.
They get the in-school deferment, the interest subsidies if applicable. The source stresses that even 1 year could make a life-altering difference to the total debt burden.
Crucial deadline. What else?
Track the policy yourself. Keep an eye on the federal student aid website. Watch for interest rate hikes. Read the fine print on anything you sign. Don't assume, the author warns, that the mainstream media will flag every important change.
Okay, that's practical. What about the bigger picture? Political action.
The source urges engagement. Organize. Speak up. Ask the hard questions loud and clear.
Like at town halls or candidate events.
Exactly. Go to school board meetings, too. If someone wants your vote, the source says, ask them directly. Do you support getting rid of in-school deferment? Yes or no?
Simple question.
Is education a right, or is it a product to be bought and sold? Will you fight to bring back borrower protections? Will you support canceling the predatory debt already out there?
Will you oppose more privatization? Where do you stand on free college? On loan forgiveness?
All of it. Ask directly. And the source argues, if they waffle or can't give you a straight answer, they don't deserve your support.
And share this information.
Definitely. If you're an educator, parent, student, concerned citizen, talk about this. Workplace, social media, community groups. Let people know this wasn't some unavoidable accident, and it doesn't have to be permanent.
Because the silence is how these things happen.
Silence is how the traps get set, the source insists. Visibility is how we start to take them apart.
All right. Let's leave our listeners with a final thought from this deep dive. It's pretty powerful.
Okay.
We don't actually have to accept this trajectory. We can refuse this version of the future. We can work to build something different, something that doesn't start with crushing debt and end in burnout.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes the part they don't want you to remember. None of this is set in stone.
Public education was built once upon a time. Protections were won through struggle. They weren't just handed down.
Collective action really does change things. History shows that. This isn't the end of the story, unless we decide to let it be.